Thank you very much. And I want to thank all of our kickoff presenters here. They all have gone through a traumatic set of experiences that none of us want to experience at all, and yet it's way too common around the world. I remember talking with a priest in northern Iraq after his parish had been overrun by ISIS, and I was talking with him about the aftermath of that, and he said the most difficult thing was really pushing people and trying to teach people to and help people to forgive. And here you heard from testimony from all three here of people that have forgiven in remarkable, horrific circumstances. Thank you all again for making the sacrifice and the great travels to be here with us today. Thank you. A small cadre of government officials leads the official efforts for religious freedom globally. All occupy positions created each within the last 20 years as the world began to take seriously oppression of religious adherents. Mostly unsung, they are essential advocates for moving the world towards a more peaceful, prosperous, and open place. And they're all my colleagues. I'm calling them up to the stage now. Figel is the EU Special Envoy for the promotion of freedom of religion or belief outside of Europe. It works outside of the EU. He's the first to serve in this position. Jan is a former European Commissioner for Education and former First Deputy Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic. He's done a great job, and we certainly hope the new Commission will extend your position and provide you even more support. Jan, welcome. Ambassador Marit Wiig, please come on forward, is a special representative at Norway's Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Freedom of Religion. She's the second to serve in this role. Her previous posts included serving as the Norwegian ambassador to Pakistan and as Deputy Undersecretary of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Norway has been a great partner in this cause, contributing to the International Religious Freedom Fund and providing critical resources to support the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. That's a group you're going to hear from later on. Part of our week's activities is really going to be just about explaining to you the apparatuses that exist and that are in place and that hopefully you can access. And she's been an excellent, and Norway's been an excellent ally. Good to have you here on board. Lastly is Ahmed Shaheed, appointed as an independent expert for the UN Human Rights Council as the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief. He previously served as the first UN Special Rapporteur of the Human Rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran and twice served as the Foreign Minister of the Maldives. Ahmed has been a great partner working entrepreneurially. That may seem like a strange word to say about a UN official, but working entrepreneurially to find opportunities to advance these issues, and he certainly has done that, and he also has been a great partner. Ahmed. There are other special representatives that we could have invited, but we couldn't get them all on stage. One is involved with our neighbor to the north, the Canadians. They have had either an ambassador or special diplomats focused on these issues. We appreciate that Canada launched 4 years ago the International Contact Group on Freedom of Religion or Belief. It's the first such network of its kind to provide a platform for increased diplomatic activity in this space. We and the Canadians now serve as co-chairs of that group. And we've been working on new steps for that group to announce in the coming days to further deepen the alliance of values that has coalesced around the fundamental right of religious freedom. So we look forward to hearing comments. We'll hear from each of these in the order that I presented for a period of about 5 minutes, and then we're going to go to a question and answer session for them. So with that, Jan, you want to kick us off from your seat there?
Thank you. Thank you, Sam, not only for introduction, but for your committed work and cooperation. I'm glad that we can work together, and I hope that we can achieve much more after such gatherings like last year and especially now, this time in Washington together. On my contribution, I would focus on 3 points. How it came into being, that the European Union has a special envoy, first ever. Then what are my modalities of work or how I operate, and then some lessons I learned or messages to share together here for tomorrow. So the reason I'm here, or nomination of the first ever EU Special Envoy, is a fruit of martyrdom. It's not the result of lobbying or kind of politics behind, although I did a lot personally to persuade EU leaders that we have to do something after 2014 when Daesh, ISIS started really mass atrocities in Iraq and Syria. I wrote many letters, this is not so important, but then in 2016, February, European Parliament adopted very, very strong, clear, unequivocal resolution denouncing not only mass atrocities, but also asking, demanding to do something. The same happened here in March in Congress, US Congress, and then British Parliament, and so on. So according to this resolution, President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, decided then in May to nominate first ever EU Special Envoy for freedom of religion or belief, and invited me, which was kind of a boomerang coming back to the person who tried to persuade the others to do something. So I started, and I'm in this position since 3 years, until October this year. Then future commission will decide what comes next, and future starts now, because today there is a vote in the European Parliament on the designated president of the Commission, on Ursula von der Leyen. So we shall see. But I hope that Europe will care, will continue, not because of me, but because this is important, not only in the Middle East, but worldwide. I was attached to the development agenda, which is very open and broad, international. I was working with Commissioner Mimica. There was also a group in the Parliament, first time ever since 2014, called Intergroup on freedom of religion or belief and religious tolerance. We got guidelines of 28 countries as a consensual diplomatic instrument to promote freedom of religion or belief, which was also a good contribution. So the momentum is here, at least from European point of view, and we need to institutionalize these policies to show we are working on this permanently, efficiently, and with like-minded partners, countries worldwide. Secondly, how I operated. I focused, of course, first of all on Middle East, but also on South Asia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, so priority regions, and then on country levels, because each country is different. I visited many of them: Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Sudan, Senegal, Burkina, Morocco, Pakistan, Malaysia, India, Vietnam, just to name a few, but also in Europe, Bosnia, Northern Macedonia, Russia. We try to adapt relations policies to each situations, which means to use our projects, programs, bilateral and multilateral instruments, and to promote FORB as an important part of human rights dialogue, human rights policy. Secondly, I was quite active, and I'm glad that Ahmed Shaheed is here with international fora, especially United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, but also New York, G20 Interfaith Forum. We have established European Academy of Religion in Bologna in 2016, which is a contribution to know more, to combine science and religious realities, to learn, to be literate in the current 21st century. And then third dimension was and is dialogue, cooperation with faith-based organizations and civil society. This is very crucially important. Different instruments I already mentioned, including financial. We have good treaties or leverages. We have also projects under European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights. There may be, I think, more than 50 already projects dealing with FORB, financed by the European Union. Advocacy for individual cases, some of them were really bloody cases or issues of life and death, lifelong imprisonment or death penalty, some of them successful. It speaks that it is important to be engaged also on, and especially on, individual issues, not only broader reforms and adaptations of conditions, but individuals, those who suffer persecution. messages or lessons which I think are important. For freedom of religion or belief is not more, is not about, but it's in the center. It's litmus test of all human rights. If freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom to believe or not to believe is respected, then we can see freedoms of expression to be respected, freedom of assembly, association. So this is litmus test of all human rights. This is expansive human right. And therefore, we need to invest more into this area. That's why we try to do something in European Union. Secondly, it's very important for those who believe and those who do not believe. For all, it's about good governance. I lived half of my life in communist Czechoslovakia, and I can tell you stories about persecution. So good governance, freedom of religion or belief is about good governance for all. And then, of course, economy and society prospering or developing. It's a question of life and death. Reports of your US Commission or ACN or many other reports speaks about life and death of millions or hundreds of billions of people, depending on the situation around FORB. We speak a lot in the world now about climate change, importance of climate change. I spoke yesterday in the National Press Club about importance of FORB climate change, religious freedom climate change, because the situation is very negative, very negative. Majority of the world does not enjoy religious freedom, and tendency is negative. So either we stop it and revert, and this is FORB climate change, or we will see century of genocides going on. Simply business as usual. Century of genocides behind, and century of genocides maybe again repeated. So we need century of hope, and this is about FORB climate change. The second message I learned is about freedom, working, living, existing only, always with responsibility. Two sides of one coin. And we cannot just speak about freedom without responsibility. It is important to nurture a mentality or ethics of responsibility. Religious leaders, faith-based organizations need and should contribute to the social responsibility. Religious social responsibility resembles a bit corporate social responsibility. Let's work on this, because this then makes freedom sustainable, fruitful. The third point was and is, I learned in some countries, for example now Egypt tries to speak about communities, mosaic, one family, not majority and minorities, but a mosaic of social components. Instead of quantitative measuring, quantitative approach, we should speak about qualitative. Everybody belongs to society, to the state, to the system. So therefore, let's adapt also language. Language is important for understanding of freedom of religion or belief for all. The fourth point, and the last, I think the most sensitive, most important in time of identity politics. Identity is important. It's not something negative. My son is different from me. We are all different. Nobody is identical to anybody, and it speaks about billions of people today, billions in the history, billions in future. We are all different. That's principle. That's not the problem. That's definition. But we are all equal in dignity. Nobody is more, whether he come or she comes from royal family or from a homeless family. And that's the great principle, that we are all equal in dignity and we are all different in identity. And steps from identity politics leads to the responsibility ethics, which means I think we need to learn how to live together in this diversity, because diversity, as I say, is not the problem, but reality and definition, principle. And therefore, culture of human dignity is needed, because human dignity is the base of all human rights. In dignity, we are all equal. And political response, and that's the message I want to share with you, political message, lesson from equal dignity is equal citizenship. Equal citizenship. In Iraq, in post-war or post-conflict countries, everywhere. Equal citizenship means rights, duties, protection, access, participation. We are all right holders and duty bearers. And I think that if our foreign policies brings these messages into forefront, into practical realities, into constitutional clauses or legislation, I think we will see different, better, more humane 21st century. That's my not only learning, but also contribution and conviction. European Union is based on unity in diversity. We speak a lot about our issues and problems. We learned, we adapted from the atrocities and divisions of the past to live together in diversity. It is possible, it is important, it's enriching, and we can share, and we want to share with you all these lessons. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Odd, please.
Thank you. First of all,
I'm sorry, we're going to Odd next and then Med. We'll wrap up with you.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Brownback. Thank you for inviting me to this forum. And let me also start by thanking, through you, thanking your staff for the magnificent work they do in taking a leadership role in this area. I was appointed Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief in 2017. And I work, as you said, in the Ministerial Foreign Affairs of Norway. I'm a public servant and a career diplomat. And so my predecessors have also come from the Foreign Service. We established this position back in 2006-07 in the aftermath of the so-called cartoons, where violence, extreme violence, in fact, followed in several countries. And I think we all, through that, became aware of the literally explosive political impact and mobilizing force that religion can have, in a negative sense in this case. This was so different to the situation in a country like Norway, which is largely secular in its approach. So, with this as a starting point, of course political in the sense, it was still placed and located in our Department of Human Rights to ensure, I believe, that we need to start with the basics to analyze such a situation. This is a human rights issue. Freedom of religion or belief has to do with tolerance, with freedom of expression, with respect for the freedom of others. Now, the position has evolved over the years, and changing governments have maintained the position and even strengthened it in the past. So what is it that I do? And I think I'd like to divide my short presentation in bullet points, so to speak, just as Jan just did. Where is it that I work, and what are the issues that I raise? Let me first say that I feel a strong responsibility for the domestic scene. We have to ensure that our diplomats, representatives of our Foreign Service, representatives of Norway, are informed and are aware of these issues and can handle them with respect and insights in the countries where they work, countries which are very different from our own countries. So we have guidelines for the diplomatic service, and we do training. So that is one part of, or one area where I work. Secondly, a small country like Norway, and we're not represented in more than a fraction of the world's countries, a small country like us has to work through partners and with partners. The United Nations is an extremely important partner for us. We work with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is located in Geneva. We provide support and we discuss with them where are the relevant countries, where are the relevant areas to work, what is the best approach. Through the United Nations, we also participate in the Universal Periodic Review, which you may be familiar with, where individual countries are examined at regular basis. And we try, and I must say try because we're not always successful, but we try and include issues of freedom of religion or belief in that examination. We also work, obviously, with international organizations. We work with the US. We work, Jan mentioned support for individuals. And I am very pleased that we have an agreement with Freedom House to support individuals and smaller groups which are persecuted. This is an important part of our activities. But of course, it's small in the sense that it deals with individuals and not large groups. We work with other international organizations and we work with Norwegian civil society. I'm happy that some of them are present here today. You mentioned Ambassador Brownback, IPP Forb. This is not a Norwegian initiative, it's an international initiative for parliamentarians who are extremely important in their individual countries in raising these issues, in creating legislation and in following up. The organization is based in Norway and supported by us. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, is also an important partner for us. What is it that we raise? Just briefly in terms of bullet points. Now, FORB, freedom of religion or belief, is one of the rights, one of the important articles, as you know, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But all human rights are interrelated and interdependent. And I see it as part of my mandate to raise the discussion on how we ensure that we have an informed debate on freedom of religion or belief and freedom of expression, freedom of religion or belief and gender issues and women's rights, on LGBTI rights, cultural rights, and other areas where we know that often more traditional interpretations of religion may clash with developments in society and with hard-won rights in these areas. In this field, I believe, and I know that you're aware of that, Ahmed, the Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion is a great help in raising such issues in your reports. I meet regularly with representatives of faith groups, of organizations that work with these issues, and we have often tough discussions on this, but I believe that we are able to move these discussions forward and to increase the respect between various groups which have different views on such important issues. Another issue that I often raise is that, yes, religion is an important factor in many of the conflicts we see in the world, but it is very often not the only reason. We need an informed debate when we tackle issues of conflict in foreign countries, and we need to analyze carefully the context in which they take place. So, to sum up, I try and be active in many areas, and I try and encourage greater understanding and greater analysis of the challenges that we meet when we advocate for in various areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Ahmed.
Thank you, Ambassador
Thank
Brownback,
you.
for having me on and for leadership in this field as well. It's good to be back here in Washington for the second annual ministerial meeting. I work for the UN, but I am not of the UN. My day job is at the University of Essex. I am among some 50 experts hired by the UN, engaged by the UN, without pay, of course, to work for them on specific themes that we work on. So the theme I am working on for the UN now is freedom of religion or belief. I am the 5th mandate holder. The mandate goes back to 1986. So people ahead of me had done a lot of groundwork on clarifying the thematic content of this right. But still, we find that normative confusion, lack of normative clarity is one of the biggest challenges we face in advancing this right. What precisely does this right entail? What is the scope of this right? In many countries where I've been, I come across claims that, well, my religious beliefs dictate me to do this, therefore I should have the right to do so, even if that might come at the expense of someone else's rights. That is clearly not covered under this right. So clarifying the normative concept is an important priority for my mandate, along with my colleagues here who work from different perspectives on this. So one of the key themes I focus on is doing that. I do this through 2 annual reports that I produce to the UN, one to the Council in Geneva and one to the General Assembly in New York. I have done reports on the links between freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief, often seen as clashing rights, but clarifying the normative interlinks between these 2 rights. I have looked at the nature of state-religion relationships. What is the best form of that relationship? Is it secularism or is it some other form of link with religion and the state? I have looked at countering violent extremism and how that impacts upon the right to exercise freedom of religion or belief. I'm also currently working on, for my next report to the GA in this September, on anti-Semitism and how that impacts upon rights of Jewish communities around the world to exercise their right to freedom of religion or belief, and also how that impacts upon general societal challenges on hate speech. My future reports will look at links between gender and freedom of religion or belief, and also I'm working on assessing how far we have come since the past 40 years on implementing the 1981 UN Declaration on the elimination of all forms of intolerance and of discrimination based on religion. The mandate I hold is primarily tasked to monitor how states implement this. So my key mandate from the Council is to promote respect for freedom of religion or belief around the world, identify emerging obstacles and existing obstacles to the enjoyment of that right, to monitor how states implement or violate the declaration, and to make sure I keep a gender perspective in how I monitor this right. The tools I have at my disposal are writing letters of allegation to various governments who I find in violation of this right. I find that the bulk of my communications are about violations of freedom of religion or belief in tandem with violations of freedom of expression. So blasphemy laws or other laws that restrict religious expression is one of the common challenges I encounter in this field and what I write most about. The tools primarily focus on getting redress to individuals. So advocacy for individual redress is something very important in the work I do. I also, like I said, look at structural issues, thematic issues. So when I visit countries, I examine the whole legal framework and the policies and practice in that country and offer recommendations on how they may address this. I have been to Albania, to Uzbekistan, to Tunisia, and the Netherlands. I shall be in Sri Lanka shortly, and then next year in Malaysia and hopefully Tajikistan. All these are by invitation. I cannot go to a country without state consent. So the biggest challenge for me in this sense is lack of state cooperation. When states do not cooperate with the UN mandate, there's not much really we can do, apart from perhaps some naming and shaming. Sometimes that works, but often that is not the best thing to do. What is best to do is to work with governments and civil society and to make them work together to ensure that that right is respected for everybody in that context. I work with several countries which emphasize in their foreign policies promoting FOB around the world. So Norway, the EU, the US, Canada, Denmark are among my common, if you like, like-minded countries working on this theme. As a sole person with another job to do, I find the support I get from these colleagues very, very, very important. What works best is when I can put together a coalition of actors, whether it's civil society actors or governments working together towards a common interest of everybody. So I believe the importance of what is called orchestration, getting a lot of actors to work together. I believe it's important in this work that I foster what are called cross-faith or cross-boundary coalitions. Rather than simply working with one religious group, it's best to have coalitions of different faith groups working together. So one of the things I have been involved in the UN context is developing something called Faith for Rights Initiative. This was an attempt by the UN to bring together actors from different faiths and none, and also scholars and philosophers, I suppose, into one room, asking them how would, from your different points of view, starting points, advance towards the Universal Human Rights Declaration. How would you promote that from your different faith commitments, or if you have no faith, from humanist perspectives as well? So the idea is that all of us, whether we have faith or none, can still be able to work together to achieve the goal of respecting everybody's right to freedom of religion or belief. There are 4 literacies I promote in my work. One I call religious literacy. I find time and time again that misunderstanding, prejudice, bias, stereotyping is often based upon lack of knowledge of what the other is about. So promoting understanding of other faiths is an important task that I emphasize. It's also important for diplomats when they work in different contexts to know what the different country contexts are about and how they can advance this. The other is normative literacy on freedom of religion or belief. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of contestation about the scope of this right, often about the limitations clause. Many states argue that, of course, we can limit right to freedom of religion or belief on account of public safety, public order, health, and morals, and of others. Not realizing that even in that context, that must be the exception, not the rule, and must still follow certain proportionality criteria. So promoting literacy on the human rights framework is important. The third, in this day of globalization, I think media literacy is important, both for journalists and also for others, to know where to get your stories, to know which stories are more reliable. I say in the UK, to know your Onion from The Guardian is important. So to have, to know the authenticity of the stories you're relaying. Also, for journalists to know that when they report, they don't simply bring the loudest voices on religion, but they respect the diversity of voices there, and they also bring them out to the fore. The final literacy is digital literacy. In this day of social media and so on, it's vital to know how digital media works, digital systems work. Artificial intelligence can create, algorithms can create filter bubbles through which we only learn what we are already reading about. So silos or filter bubbles can really undermine understanding. So these 4 literacies are very, very important. Finally, my last comment, if I may, is I stress the importance of using existing tools developed to advance this framework. So within the UN context, there's something called the Rabat Plan of Action on guiding states on how to address incitement to hate, which argues that rather than criminalize all hate speech, criminalize those that actually incite imminent violence. At the other levels, have other measures, including countering with positive speech. If somebody is engaging in bad speech to exclude some community, engage in counter speech that actually expresses solidarity with the community and negates that speech. The other is something called 1618 resolution. It's a very long title. It's about combating stigmatization, incitement to violence, and negative stereotyping of persons based on religion or belief. And attached to this is something called the Istanbul process. Now, the US was instrumental in initially proclaiming this resolution and also in pushing this forward. The Istanbul process has an action plan which essentially brings together all that we need to do to ensure that we foster and promote societies which can respect right for freedom of religion or belief. So my appeal to everybody is to work to mobilize these synergies amongst governments, amongst society, amongst faith-based actors to harness these tools we have. Finally, so I said before, but my last point is, in this day and age of pushback on human rights generally, we need to find creative ways to push back against that pushback. So one way of doing that would be to ensure we contextualize human rights in all contexts. We make people understand that it's not something Geneva or somebody else is imposing on you. It's something we've all been trying to do. We've all been trying to find the good life all throughout history. So relate this without undermining the international human rights framework to different contexts. And finally, exploring the benefits that come from respecting FOB. You cannot have human rights in a country that does not respect the liberty of conscience. So ensuring that we look at the benefits we can have from respecting FOB for other areas. One area is the SDGs, the Development Goals UN has set. The tagline here is leaving no one behind. If we did not respect freedom of religion or belief for everybody, we would not succeed in not leaving anyone behind. Thank you.
Very good. Very good, Ahmed. Good. Some excellent points made here. What we're going to do is have some questions and comments that we'll have engaged here. I'd ask my fellow participants here if you can keep your answers brief, and that way we'll get to as many of these questions as we possibly can. Before we go to those, there is another, what we're trying to do is introduce you to various assets that exist around. You've got three here on the stage. You've got one from the EU, one from the UN, one from Norway. Other countries have these as well. We're trying to introduce you to assets to connect with. Another one that's here in the United States is the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and a number of the commissioners are here. And I was wondering if they would please stand so we could recognize the commission that's here. They do a great job. Thank you, guys. Before long, we'll break for a long lunch break, and the intentionality of that, to have it long, is that so people will build these relationships and make these connections. So I'm trying to introduce as many people as possible, and I hope that can take place. My fellow participants here on this panel, just briefly, because we've got here today civil society, religious leaders, what really advice do you have for them on how civil society can best help you in your work, in what you're doing? I relate with them. We work all the time on a religious freedom roundtable here where we connect. Jan, what's the best way that you're recommending that this group that's assembled here can work with you in the EU? Yeah, 30 seconds.
Thank you. I will follow your example and say that there are several other special, either envoys or ambassadors or representatives. For example, I see German colleague Markus Grübel.
Oh, good.
From last year, Michael Sur from Denmark, he was around.
Your German colleague, would you please stand so people can see you as well, that's in this position as well. Good.
Michael Sur from Denmark.
Very good.
Okay. Lord Ahmed is coming from United Kingdom, and there is a new system and protection for religious freedom in Hungary. In Lithuania, we expect some news, I hope, from Netherlands. So this is a momentum now, at least from the European Union perspective, and we need to work together. And my answer to your question with civil society and Facebook organizations, I recommend and I offer, would love to share 3 points: hardworking, team working, and networking. Because if we want to achieve something, we need to work hard with knowledge, with memory, with openness, open-minded, open-hearted approach. But also in teams, it's synergy. It's about not mathematics, but really shared vision, shared ground or common ground, common interest. And then we can have a common future and common good, bonum commune. And then, of course, networking globally. The world is not so big. It's relatively small. And if we gather together and go on working together, I think it's a power. History is made by creative minorities. Majority will join, will add. We had in our country, in Czechoslovakia and Slovakia, velvet revolution, because majority wanted to get rid of the past, which was totalitarian. But it started with fight or actions of groups, of minorities. So that's why I say, active minority can change a lot if it is active, if it is open, team working and networking. So again, hard working, team working, networking.
Very good.
Thank you.
Ahmed? How about your comments on what civil society can do to work and reach you at the UN? Maybe you want to post your cell phone number here.
Well, I think the most important thing that can be done is to ensure that, well, the power they have to extend solidarity to those who are victimized in their own contexts, to stand up for their members in the community, and then, of course, communicate to us or elsewhere what's happening to them. So documenting what's happening in the country, and then also express solidarity with those who are victimized, and then networking, like Ian said, around the world. In my current report on anti-Semitism, I've had 13 city consultations. All these were consultations with Jewish communities in that country. They were able to provide me great insights I would not have picked up otherwise. So being able to communicate, interact with the mandate is super good in terms of being able to have the information necessary to make those reports public at the UN. So engagement is a crucial part of that.
How do they engage you at the UN? I always imagine the UN is hard to reach. I mean, just, okay, do I dial up the UN? And
Right. It is a difficult thing. There's, of course, an address which says SR-FOB, but then that's a very difficult one. I encourage people to reach out to that, but I also try to make myself visible by having my own other entry points of contact.
so if some of these people here wanted to have you come out to different meetings that they were hosting, that's a possibility?
Yes, they could. I mean, I have both a UN mail and also a private unit set up here in the US, in New York, at the Ralph Bunche Institute, which is active, again, reaching out to the society. So either of these contact points would be good to reach out to me and to join these activities. Or my own address at Essex University, email address will work. So reach out to me, and I'm very keen to engage all of you in the work that I do.
Odd, how about you in Norway? I'm sure you're out and accessible to the Norwegian people, but you've got a global reach and focus. So how do you work, and would you work with this civil society gathered here?
Well, the advantage of civil society is, of course, that they have a different access than we as government have. Not only at the grassroots level, but they have an access to activists and to organizations that work at the local level in the various countries, which is different from the one that we as government representatives have. So the dialogue that we have is extremely important, and the information that civil society can bring to the government level that we can then act on at a more official level is extremely important, and I encourage that all the time. We also encourage civil society to participate in our, well, I wouldn't call it round table, but at least in our consultative groups. We invite quite broadly to share information. And then, of course, civil society has the unique role of being a pressure group to act on politicians and to share more publicly their concerns.
Good. I want to recognize Greg Mitchell is here. Greg, you want to stand up? Greg hosts the weekly Religious Freedom Roundtable here in Washington. And the reason I'm pointing him out is every Tuesday that I'm in town from 11 to noon, we have a roundtable, and then he runs the agenda. He's civil society. And if people are here and they want to raise the religious freedom issue, they come in and they get on the schedule and they get on the agenda. And so we try to have some informality. We'd love to see, as I mentioned here, 100 of those started around the world. So you've got the interaction of government and civil society and religious leaders on these topics, because they come up frequently and quickly, and they need to be addressed directly. So we're trying to get those spun up in a lot of different places, and Greg does a great job, and a lot of people here, and you're welcome to come if you're here. Jan, I want to build off of you made a pretty provocative and concerning question. As a relatively new grandfather, you were talking about the trend lines don't look good in this space, and you were even talking about a century of genocide if we don't get the trends changed. That's pretty dire.
Yeah, it is. you know, you mentioned in your introductory speech, Holocaust Memorial and never again. And never again means never again. But the reality is again, and again, and again.
Yeah.
And I was nominated to the position, I'm sitting here, because there was a genocide in the Middle East. So either we mean what we say, what we subscribe to, or then it's, you know, another meeting, another time lost. And it's not so much about momentum or meetings, but people suffer, real persons. They die because we abandon, we forget, we neglect, we don't care. Three enemies of evil are very visible in our societies, whether we speak about my country or maybe this country, you know it better. It's indifference, ignorance, and fear. And where these phenomena are present, evil has a lot of, you know, success, impact. So we need to work against these allies of evil and, of course, against the crime of crimes, genocide. There is convention from 1948. There is UDHR from 1948. Do we care? Do we remember? Do we commit to these conventions, or it is just history, just paper? Because it's about people, it's about us, it's about 21st century, which should, I think, and could be more humane time. And there are several issues to change or to deliver, to be more humane than it was, to be more in solidarity with the suffering people than we have been. And I think that FORP is really the way ahead, because it's the deepest expression or the way how we understand human dignity, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom to believe or not to believe, and other freedoms follow or not, if the first one is not respected. So when we gather here, it's not so much about just symbolism or memories, but really about humanity to prevail. And you know, I'm technician by education. This was part of the system when system tried to control what we learned. So that's why Soviets got for Sputnik, because they invested much more into MST studies. But humanity suffered. My name, Jan Figel, belonged to my uncle who disappeared in 50s. Simply this was the Stalinist approach. Jest человек, jest problem. Нет человека, нет проблема. If there is a man, there is a problem. If there is no man, there is no problem. So simple. Inhumane. And that's why Stalinist system was inhumane. And religions and religious communities of faith or conviction suffered. So I'm speaking a bit too much, but genocide was declared by the US Congress recently. So it's not deep history. And either we care and we come to UN and do something, or it's just a repetition of the century of genocides. So we have responsibility. That's the point. We know there are instruments, we can do something, we have powers, but we have to act accordingly.
Well said. Well said. Ahmed, you said something kind of disturbing too, really, about that there's a pushback against human rights now. I think we all tend to think, though, that human rights just grows. It's just a natural growth that takes place, but that's not the case, is it? I mean, it's something. It's a garden that has to be tended. It's an issue that has to be pursued and aggressively and constantly.
Well, I think it's hard to deny that human rights has been pushed back from many quarters around the world. But you know, I wake up every day. I work as a human rights academic and mandate holder. I have hope. I don't go to work every day thinking that, my God, I can't win this. I go hoping that I can make a difference, even however small it is. So there are these negative trends that we've all been identifying, which are quite dark. But also, we should also look at the positive trends that are out there as well. In terms of FOB itself, if you look at this, we have now a much higher profile for this right than ever before. The Ministerial is a good example here, how we brought together such a vast number of stakeholders to look at this subject. The number of governments investing, and others on Envoys, or in other ways putting money to advance this. Some countries have Envoys, others have, like Canada, have offices dedicated to advancing this right. But all told, more governments around the world are putting a lot more effort into this. We also have cross-faith, interfaith efforts. We have the Abu Dhabi document recently. Some of these documents may not fully comply with the human rights framework, but that's an attempt to really give a message of hope and love and compassion. We have the Marrakesh Declaration, and so a whole lot of things being done to really advance this. And if you look at the FOB world, it's a world with activity now. So there are trends we can push forward, but there are also very, very dark forces out there, including technology, which can be manipulated for dark deeds, as you said earlier. So I think on balance, this is a moment we really have to assert ourselves to show that the good can prevail over the evil. I think we have what it takes to make sure that working together, we can do that.
It's my sense that this is one of those unusual moments, and as a follower and a practitioner of politics for a number of years, you can pick up momentum or see momentum lose, and if there's not a momentum, nothing's really going to move. It just takes so much to move things. But there is a momentum on this one because there's been so much carnage. There has been so much difficulty. We heard from 3 people this morning that were involved in horrific events, and that the world leaders and people around the world saying, no, this needs to stop. So that I have that hope. And yet, Ahmed, I want to give this question to you. Yesterday, Pew Research released new findings that over the decade ending in 2017, government restrictions on religion, these are laws, policies, actions by state officials that restricted religious belief and practices, increased markedly. So in our modern time, we've got more restrictions placed by government on religious practitioners, on religious adherents. Why and how do we reverse that trend? You work a lot with governments. How do we reverse that trend?
Did you ask me?
Yes, please.
Well, I tend to agree with Ahmed that we need to be optimistic in terms of the progressing human rights. And I think, well, some of the previous speakers spoke about the media. Media has a role, social media has a role. And I think that one positive development is that governments or non-government actors, they can't get away with it anymore. So more public awareness, more information about what's going on, more pressure against governments that violate human rights, either on an individual basis or in terms of legislation and practice. I think that is the answer.
Parting thoughts, each of you. Jan, what do you want this group to hear?
What I want what?
Parting thoughts. What do you want them, what thought do you want to leave them with? You've worked in this space diligently, and
yeah, maybe I would add to the you said dire message. Peace is fruit of justice, and justice is important for all, for ordinary polite people, but also for criminals. If we don't care for justice for perpetrators of genocides or crimes, how can we prevent the future? So justice is important for all, and this genocidal point is either we fail in all 3 Ps, which are principles of the protection. It's prevention, protection, and punishment. Prevention of genocide, protection of victims, and then punishment of perpetrators. Or we fail, and then we see repetitions and inhumane tendencies and problems of our times. So I would call for justice to be understood as something very important for you and me, for all around, and fruits will be great because peace is fruit of justice. And nemo dat quod non habet. You cannot give what you don't have. We can share only what we have. And if we have peace inside, if we have understanding of importance of justice, then this is the great gift, great contribution. So I wish that we educate ourselves, that we educate young and less young people for justice for all. And it means dignity for all. Thank you.
Ahmed?
Mine is linked to Ian's point here. If you go back to the first line of the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that the foundation of peace, freedom, and justice in the world is the recognition of the inherent, inalienable equality of dignity of every person and equal moral worth of every member of the human family. So to recognize our equal dignity and that we are part of the human family is vitally important to ensure that we go past this. So for my party message is, let's build bridges and recognize that by building bridges, we can overcome the negative trends that are ahead of us.
Good. Ahmed?
I'd like to pick up on two things that my colleagues here mentioned. Ahmed spoke about the Sustainable Development Goals and of leaving no one behind. Now that is a political commitment that all governments have subscribed to through the UN. And secondly, Jan spoke about inclusive citizenship, rights, equal rights for all. And I think if we manage to combine those two, the development issue and the rights issue, I think then we will be on the right track.
Thank you. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jan. Appreciate it. Ahmed, thank you. Ahmed, thank you very much. Well, we've had a good start to the Ministerial, and now we're going to be breaking for lunch. We've got, and we planned this way, a long lunch break, because a big part of this is really building and having a chance to talk with each other and build together. And so that's why we put it this way. It's a good chance to get to know one another. I don't really like the term networking. I like the term relationships, because I just think that's what this is really about. It's building relationships with each other, and the network and the action takes place afterwards. But if you got a relationship with somebody, then you can do something. And a relationship's a lot more fun anyway. It's a friendship. So normally we'd say, at least around my household, we'd say a grace, but considering the diverse nature of this group, I think I'll leave that to each of you to do individually. I don't think we could get that done collectively. However, I want to ask for your grace as we try to feed a record number of people here at State Department. This isn't our strong suit. We have 2 tents, so you want to listen to this. This is about the meal. We have 2 tents and enough food, but there may need to be some patience as you wait. We've got staff to help you find your way there. If you're one of the fortunate ones to get to the tents first, please proceed through to the far tent to allow others to come behind you. So, okay, there's food at the end of the tent too, and there's food at the front of the tent, but go to the end of it if you would first, to allow as many people to come on in as possible behind you. Also, as you leave the auditorium or the overflow space, please take your belongings with you. Don't leave them here or somewhere else. You need to have those with you. Excuse me. Have those with you and keep those with you at all times. We will then reconvene for the afternoon session. I'm looking at my time here. Somebody bark that out to me about, what is it? 1 o'clock? Somebody's negotiating 1:05. We're going to say 1 o'clock, knowing that it probably won't be at 1 o'clock. But we are delighted to have you here. Have a good time building those relationships and enjoy lunch. Hey, so good to see you again. How are you? Very good to see you. Yes, I know.
You promised me you come to Jordan.
Hold on.
And I take you to the